We will wait for a few minutes till everyone joins.
Sure, not a problem.
Is there a background noise from my side? If I, just when we are quiet?
No, Shankar.
Okay, thank you.
We will wait for 2 more minutes. Start them.
Sure. Sunday morning.
Megha, should we get started in respecting those that have already joined? I think we are 5 minutes into the session.
Yes,
Yes.
we can start. Yeah, just give me a second. Yeah, so a very good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining in. It's a lovely Sunday morning. Our agenda for the session is digital transformation, keeping up with the changing world. So as we all know that the industries are changing at a very rapid pace and everything is shifting to digital platforms. So it becomes extremely important to understand the transition well and understand those challenges that are faced along with it. So to understand, to get a great detail, we have with us with our two esteemed professors, Professor Srinivas Pingali and Professor Shankar Prakash, along with Ms. Radhika Gupta, our alumni. I will quickly introduce each one of them. So Professor Srinivas Pingali is a faculty of practice in business policy and strategy at IIM Udaipur. He has over 28 years of rich experience of working in multinational companies like Tata Group, Accenture, and entrepreneurial companies such as Quattro Global Services. He provided his expertise in various domains like consulting, consumer products, product management, and sales marketing. And Sir holds a doctorate in digital transformation, small and medium enterprises from ISB, and is a specialist in digital agility, innovation, and entrepreneurship. Professor Shankar Prakash is a faculty of practice in operations management, quantitative methods, and information at IIM Udaipur. He has over 20 years of industry experience, including working with IBM for 11 years, where he led the strategy and planning function globally for IBM's application service business. He has extensive experience in evangelizing service offerings and thought leadership related to the transformation of businesses through the use of digital technologies. He is an avid practitioner of applied artificial intelligence and has research interests related to AI and the future of work. We have with us our alumni, Ms. Radhika Gupta, who is currently working as a consultant at Accenture and is a pass out of DEM batch 2021 of IIM Udaipur. She was also awarded the gold medal for her academic excellence. She has over 8 years of industry experience in various domains like publishing and enterprise risk management, technical consulting, and technology product management. We welcome you all. So the discussion will be moderated by Radhika. And please feel free to drop in any questions in the chat box. We'll be taking it up collectively at the end of this discussion. So over to you, Radhika.
Thanks, Megha, for that intro. And before starting, I would really thank the Institute for having me here and be interacting with the Professor Srinivas and Professor Shankar. It certainly brings me a lot of memories of last year when I was being taught by both the professors during the lectures. So, as some of you in the audience would know, professors have also recently published a book on digital transformation. And it was recently published, and I'd like to congratulate both the professors on doing that. And which brings me to my first question, actually, to both the professors. What was the motivation, sirs, for you to come up with this book? What was the gap that you saw and you thought that it would be nice to put your thoughts into a form of a book?
One, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining. Good morning, Megha and Radhika. Thanks for having us here. We certainly look forward to interacting with the alumni. So I think a great question, Radhika. So as you know that we've been teaching, both Shankar and I are practitioners of digital transformation, digital strategies for as long as it has existed, which is, I would say, about less than a decade now. Also, when we started teaching digital strategy and digital transformation at various forum over the last couple of years, we taught the 1-year DEM program. We taught the 2-year programs, MBAs within IIM Udaipur. I also taught a number of management development programs across the country, where I was introducing the concepts of digital strategies to mid-level, and we did some senior level workshops as well, but largely mid-level and entry-level employees. And one of the things we found is that there's a lot of confusion on the various terminology used in digital. So there's digital transformation, there's digital strategies, there's digital technology, and even among senior management, there's a lot of confusion on what all of these terms are. While it's very clear that digital transformation starts at the top, it's equally important for everyone within an organization to kind of understand what digital is. There are several books, and as we were kind of conducting these programs, we realized that there are several books. In fact, the authors of one of the books is going to join us in a fantastic webinar on, I think, the 2nd of December, Dr. Sunil Gupta of Harvard. So fantastic books there, but a lot of these books are targeted at chief executive officers or CEOs, CXOs. And we found that there was a gap for a book which is more at a practitioner level. So that was the kind of the motivation for writing the book. So it's actually a textbook. It's not even a book. So it's not a casual reading book in that sense. And we are targeting it primarily at MBA and BBA students, early executives. So people say in the first 5 to 10 years of their career who want to understand how to actually implement digital transformation, whether within their organizations or within their client organizations. We've also received a lot of interest from engineering students, engineering colleges, because they are teaching a lot of digital technologies, but the students don't really know how these technologies are coming together in whatever that they're being used for. So long answer, Radhika, but that is really the motivation. This is not a book for CEOs. This is a book for a large part of the audience of today's program.
Certainly, sir. And like I could also relate because now that I'm working already with an organization, I understand how the confusion sometimes percolates right from the top level to the people who are working at the ground to understand any client problem and then come up with a possible solution to handle that problem. So it is very important to have that clarity in mind as to why are we talking about digital transformation and what is it that will actually help us solve any problem.
Absolutely.
So, which actually takes me to the next question. And I would like to understand from you what, according to you, are the main enablers of digital transformation? How a organization or a business would understand that now is the time that they should start moving on, and what would be the ideal starting point for such businesses who want to undergo transformation and stay relevant in today's world?
Right. So let me take that question, right? So see, the trigger for transformation using digital technologies, the way we look at transforming businesses have existed since businesses have been there, right? So if technology or digital technology is a trigger, the right time to start is now, right? So there is no state of maturity that you are going to wait for, or a crisis to wait for to initiate digital transformation, right? But having said that, it'll be better if we can just look at the plumbing of what constitutes a digital strategy, right? So if we take that, then some of these questions can be intrinsically answered by the practitioner or the enterprise in question, right? So most of the time, the idea of digital, right? So digital as an idea is there since the first digital computer was invented maybe 75 years ago, right? So one of the things that we see as a fad today is that everything starts with the digital technology, right? So today we have encapsulated digital technology as data, big data, artificial intelligence, and put all these, the Lego blocks together. We kind of start with that as the trigger, or the start as that as a starting point, right? But what we argue in our practitioner workshops as well as in the book is that all transformation, the first ingredient is that start with the customer, right? So while it will sound very pedestrian as to say that what else can you start with, right? But that's not how the world works today, right? So most of the conversations start with the technology, right? So now, moment we say that this is the right time, then we start with the customer, and there are at least 4 other elements that kind of helps organizations think through the transformation, right? So the first thing, can you, not necessarily in that order, is there a change to the products and offerings that the organization is can offer, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing would be processes that are wiring this organization, can that be transformed? So you take a product or a process view, right? So then you can take, if anything in the product or process changes, there has to be a consequential change in the organization, right? So for example, chief digital officers. Now, we've never heard of such ideas, chief data officer. So organizationally, there are roles that are going to be introduced, and the whole hierarchy is going to be transformed, right? And all these 3, if you say the product, process, and organization, and are eventually going to lead to change in business models, right? what makes money for the company will change when these things change. And then all of this are going to be underpinned by a bunch of digital technologies, right? So you start with the customer and you go through these the buckets of inquiry, and that's how you land with what would change and how it can change. And let me take a very beaten down example, right? So the example is known to all of you. That makes it easy for me to not explain the example. So is Uber, right? So Uber in a personal transportation, right? So let's not look at Uber as a public transport industry. If you look at personal transportation or personal mobility, so it has changed everything that we talk about in these elements, right? So the way you engage with the provider itself starts with the process of engaging with between the user and the provider has changed, right? So it's going to be granular, digital, on an app, real time, on the fly. So all of this are basically the customer engagement has changed. Then we go look at as a product, there are so much levels of customizations possible, right? So if you look at a car for personal mobility, comes as a capex as a product into a home. Now, if you look at that personal mobility as the solution, then you have so many variants of it, right? I can choose the type of car, duration I want to go, right? I can be completely uncertain about how long I want to use it. So this, if you look through the lens of this popular example of Uber, through from customer to product to process to business model, and then wrap it around saying that what made it possible is the underlying digital technology. So at some level, now is the time to start for any organization, put the customer at the forefront of this whole discussion and be ready for transformation across at least 4 dimensions, right? So that's how I would think what is the right time and how to go about it.
Very well said, sir. Sorry, sir. You were.
Yeah.
No, that's okay. Yeah.
Just like to add to what Shankar said, right? So Shankar did kind of outline the 5 variables that we usually talk about, which is people, process, business model, the organization, product, and all of that enabled by digital technologies and the data and everything that it generates. So the one question that usually comes up is that in a transformation, are all of these required to the same extent? And the answer is really no. Some transformations will have a greater emphasis on product. Some transformations will have a greater emphasis on process. Some transformations will be more focused on business model. But the fact is that when you're going through a transformation, obviously it is driven by the customer, but you need to look at each one of these elements to make sure that you have covered all these elements in the transformation that you're planning. So that's the reason why sometimes we refer to it as a kaleidoscope, right? I mean, the pieces of glass in the kaleidoscope are the same, but the way you turn it, the pattern that emerges is very different. So you always need to look at it from that perspective, saying that these are the 4 or 5 components. It starts with the customer. These are the 4 or 5 components, but you can do a lot of things with. Sorry, Radhika, I didn't mean to digress.
No. I think the example of kaleidoscope was very helpful to understand. So I understand that fundamentally it is a change that is being driven, and the change starts from the customer's point of view as to there is something with the current processes and offerings which is not really up to the mark, or there is a scope of improvement there, and that is where fundamentally an organization should start building upon that idea of how to bring about the transformation so that it leads to a good experience as well as an efficient way of offering it as well at the same time. So to that end, I would like to understand from you how do we manage this change management, the process itself? Because as we said that the quantum of change could vary across the 5 pillars that you spoke about, but how do we manage this whole process itself so that a business is able to offer a seamless yet improvised service or product to the customer at the end of the day?
Sure. Shankar, do you want to start?
So no, I could do that, and at some level, if you see the we ask this question. So when you want to change, right? So there are 3 questions that you will end up asking, right? So it is where you are, where you want to be, and how do you get there, right? And while the 3-step abstraction can be relevant for the internet era or the era of automation in the past, so you can keep going back. The 3 elements are always the same, but digital has changed the nature of these change. Where you are is an inquiry which is very profound these days, because The moment industries start converging, without you or your competitors doing anything to the status quo, suddenly the industry structure gets altered, right? So the where you are itself requires a different level of perception from organizations. So understanding where you are is that's not how organizations are trained, right? So we had these, traditional example of digital photography and Kodak, but that's that, to me, in hindsight, that looks like one of the simplest ways of disruption, right? I mean, today, the way, take a fintech or the way industries are converging, it is beyond the natural perception of organizations and managers to understand where you are. So where you are is not a simple, brainstorming, but it is a more profound understanding of how digital technologies are influencing the structure of industries, right? Yeah. And then yes, Srinu, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. So just to add on that one question, right? And I guess digital is disrupting industries so fast that even understanding where you are has become very, very challenging, right? It's no longer that static. The other thing is that from a process side itself, the way digital is impacting this where you are question, in the past, you would get, say, a Gartner's Magic Quadrant and these 3 or 4 reports, and you kind of assess saying where you are. But today, the information on the industry and what's happening goes far beyond these 7, 8 standard industry reports. So interestingly, even like AI and ML is coming in to understand, is being used to understand where you are. Because I mean, just think of the sheer variety of sources, right? They could be it could be social media, it could be a whole lot of places where, cues are being given on what an industry is evolving to. So on one hand, digital is changing the where you are question, but on the other hand, digital is also being used to understand where one is using AI ML techniques. Sorry, Shankar, back to you.
Fair enough. So thank you, Srinivas. So when we look at the where you want to be questioned, right? So this, again, because digital enables porous industry structures, right? So where you are suddenly gets kind of muddled up if you don't have a proactive understanding. Where you want to be is also the other side of the same coin, right? Meaning you don't have to play within the boundaries of your own industry, right? So suddenly you could become that disruptor. So we keep talking about these small examples. One example is the a fastener manufacturer who's based in Europe, right? More than 100-year-old company. So what they have done is they have over 50 years transformed themselves into a logistics provider of small parts to industrial companies, right? So they have some technologies, like a smart bin which carries these small parts, etc. Right? So they had transformed using digital, and in the last 3 years, for 100 years, they have been in the area of logistics for C-type components, right? The chief critical components for manufacturing, capital goods. So now with the same bin, they are entering hospital logistics where, holding syringes, holding, vials of injections. The underlying capability from a technology and information perspective is the same, right? So now that where you want to be questioned, they are not anymore confined to logistics for C-type parts in a industrial structure, right? So the where you want to be is again, is not confined or constrained the way it was 15, 20 years ago, because the capability in terms of digital is highly fungible across problem domains, right? So if you have built capability in instrumentation or IoT or in artificial intelligence, suddenly that becomes a horizontal scaling capability. So you can enter new industries, right? So these questions, if we answer, where you are and where you want to be, the how to get there question is what fundamentally what Radhika asked in terms of changing, right? But I wanted to, put these two dots together in terms of where you go from to where you go.
If I can just add to the where you can be, I think the other thing that is changing this where you can be is this whole platform business, right? Now, in the past, industries, their boundaries were fairly well defined. If you were in pharma, then you were in pharma, right? If you were in, as Shankar said, if you were in manufacturing, you were in manufacturing. But the moment you kind of convert your business model away from these linear models to a platform, and once you have a platform, where you can be is completely opened up. I mean, just think of Amazon, right? I mean, is it a retail company? Is it a music company? Is it a movie company? Is it pharma distribution, really, I mean, the boundaries have completely been changed by the fact that it has a platform that is fungible across various businesses. So the where can you be question also has been completely disrupted by digital, because once you build a platform, you can really go, it's really up to your imagination on where you can be. Sorry, Shankar, back to you.
And I think that's a great compliment, right? So now, if you want to go from the answer the question of change, right? So one fundamental difference when you start the change is that we all drive organizations as managers based on information, right? Based on information which we deem as valuable, we harvest it, we treasure it. This is the systems of record that we have built through ERP systems, right? That's a core information asset that organizations have, right? But over the last 5 to 8 years, the information that is most relevant is increasingly happening from outside the organization, right? You don't have control over social media. You don't have control over who produces this information, but suddenly a new launched product and its fate can be decided by information that happens outside the company's boundaries and something that is not in your control, right? Not that it could be in your control, it could never be in your control, right? So the beginning of this change management challenge is that information based on which companies work are suddenly democratized and they don't have control, right? So at some level, there is a lost control in terms of, everything that you do, from product launch to process changes to customer engagement. So everything. So suddenly your perspective, your perception of the world is not within the boundaries of the company, right? If you keep this as a foundation, then we look at changes that happen are typically at the smallest unit, which is my area of inquiry, is the work, right? The work that is performed by individuals within processes of organizations is the point at which the change happens, right? So when we inquire at the question of what is changing, managing change, it is at one end of the spectrum, it is an individual's career change, right? So they have built capability. Let's take even the most advanced disciplines like artificial intelligence, right? Until 2015, the experts in artificial intelligence, expert systems have all been, or even natural language processing, people who have done NLP for 15, 20 years before 2015, have all built their capabilities based on rule-based thinking, right? Which means they understand linguistics, they understand how words come together, right? So then in terms of, if you are into processing of voice, the intelligence came from digital signal processing. So these are domain experts in that area. They've built 15 years of capability. Now change management for this work, the moment you bring in deep neural networks as a disruptor into as a technology in the digital era, and suddenly the domain expertise becomes less important, because neural networks naturally scale across the domains, right? Either computer vision or voice recognition or text. All of this, the work, whatever they carried as an expertise, as a natural language processing expert, suddenly becomes almost irrelevant for deep neural network based NLP, right? So which means this individual's capability, which was treasured and valued, has suddenly become undermined, right? So now this individual has to change to the new realities of work, right? So that's the first change management. I see this as a big area for human resource, the departments within organizations to deal with change at an individual level, right? Now we go into the next level of the continuum, right? So when work is composed together, it becomes a process in an organization, right? So then comes process, changes, which means you have to implement new systems, implement new policies, and have greater level of autonomy, right? You have less, you control less and you decentralize more because you have granular information. So that's the second level of process change, right? The moment you have process change, no process is isolated within a department, right? So now you have intra-organizational changes where a marketing dealing with supply chain, dealing with product development, dealing with HR and finance, financial reporting, all of this gets kind of impacted by the changes, right? So this is the third dimension, is the intra-organizational change. And finally, we saw that information is so valuable across domains. The moment we say it is fungible, suddenly, while it is also happening outside the company, it is also going to be relevant outside your company. Even your own company data has more value across the supply chain when you open it up, right? So which means you have to manage inter-organizational changes, right? You have hierarchies of 4 levels of changes individual to process to intra-organizational, departmental to almost ecosystem level, right? And that is not something which you define as today from here to here, there, right? You can't do a point A to point B kind of change. It almost requires this new ways of working, right? Agile thinking, incremental changes, experiment, fail, right? So it is so complex to comprehend sitting in one place. So you almost end up co-creating the change with the ecosystem, right? So that's the complexity or the Lego blocks of change, if you may, right? When you have defined or understood where you are to where you want to be, and it takes at least 4 different types of changes with varying degrees of impact. Yeah, back to you, Radhika, and Srinivas, if you have more to add, please.
I want to add, if I can add to that, right? You read anywhere and they say that 70-80% of digital transformations fail the first time. And again, nobody really knows what that number is, but it is a fairly high number. And if you really dig deeper on why these transformations have failed the first time, and I'm not saying they failed forever, a lot of it is actually related to change management, because as Shankar mentioned, there are a lot of moving parts. I mean, it doesn't matter that it's digital or whatever. Any kind of transformation involves a lot of change. And unless you have a solid plan to manage that change, the transformation is going to fail irrespective. And again, as Shankar emphasized, a lot of that is people driven, right? People are used to working in a certain way. You're used to working in silos, and then suddenly you're coming and saying, here is a new way of doing things. And one of the things about digital is that it is interdisciplinary by nature. So you can't just transform one piece of it and saying the rest of it will remain the way it is. And that's one of the reasons why change management becomes possibly the most important topic in digital transformation. And the difference between a successful transformation and a failed transformation is really the entire change management process. And again, there are several frameworks for for change management process. We don't want to get don't want to get into the details of the frameworks, but recently we were talking to a large service provider, right? One of the largest consulting companies in the world, and he was telling us a story that when they went into the company and they proposed all kinds of transformation, and all, the customer said, "Stop! First, tell me what is the change management process." And they actually wanted to create that entire environment of change even before they embark on the transformation process. So they made it a precondition saying that, tell us what change is going to happen, how we're going to handle change. Let's build the processes to deal with the change even before we start the transformation. And actually, it's quite a groundbreaking idea, because typically we go and say, okay, this is a transformation and this is how we'll manage change. The client flipped it around and said, first tell me what the change is, then we will talk about the transformation. And several examples, right? I mean, just take data. Data is such a big thing in digital transformation. Traditionally, data is owned in silos. So the marketing function owns the marketing data, the finance function owns the profit and loss related data, the P&L related data. The customer service team owns the retention related data. So and these silos have been existed for decades. So if you're actually going and doing a data transformation, you first need to break down these silos. Otherwise, you can implement whatever technologies, you can do whatever you want, but people will still continue to behave that they are in these silos. So that's the reason why I think there's almost going to be a flip where change management is going to be put ahead of any other kind of transformation. Back to you, Radhika. I hope that kind of long answer, but I hope it kind of
simple change management. Yeah.
No, it actually answers a lot of my questions, because right from the moment when we think about transformation, the question like where do we want to be is how it is not so simple anymore by virtue of the horizontal scaling capability, as Professor Shankar mentioned, and how a change at an individual can eventually translate into fundamental industry shift. It's profound to know that. One of the questions that I think about when we talk about digital transformation is the importance of culture, because like you said, each element has to change in order to bring about that transformation, and somewhere culture then becomes significant as to how to drive that change itself. And since change management is so crucial for any successful transformation, what would be your views on how to, drive, how to enable culture in a way that it drives successful transformations?
Yeah, sure. Shankar, maybe I can start off and you can add a few things, right? So from a very theoretical perspective, I guess there are two broad, I guess if you look at the entire spectrum of cultures, right? On one side of it, there is what we call technical culture, right? Which is very process driven, and most manufacturing companies and all fit into that because they're very extremely process driven. There are manuals for everything, right? The other end of it is adaptive culture, where these cultures can assimilate stimuli, whether it is internal, external, customer driven, and very rapidly make changes. So these are kind of the two extremes, and depending on the kinds of industries and also where these industries are in their maturity levels, you will find both sides of it. I mean, just to give a very simple example, if something is very stable, then you rather have a technical kind of a culture versus if you're working in an environment that is rapidly changing, then you need to have an adaptive culture, right? So those are just at a very theoretical level. And one of the reasons why the role of leadership becomes very critical in digital transformation is because a lot of culture is driven by leadership, right? The leaders kind of decide what kind of a culture that exists within an organization. And again, just to give you some very simple examples, now we already said that 70+% of transformations fail the first time. So to be successful, the organization needs to have a culture where failure is not seen as something that is negative, right? I mean, when you are making these kind of changes, there will be failures either at a project level or at a program level. The culture needs to really be a culture where what can we learn from this failure and do better the next time, rather than saying, okay, this team has failed, let's kind of put them at the bottom of the curve when it comes to evaluations, right? So I think that's the first part of a culture that needs to be changed, which is remove the fear of failure. Now, obviously, you shouldn't be going and making the same mistake again and again, but at least people should not have that fear that I'm doing something new, and if I fail, it's fine. And again, I don't want to name companies, but I've been a consultant in a company where they never actually removed this, and very quickly, so they had the old organization and they had this new organization, which was the transformational part of that organization. And they just moved people from here, part A into part B, and they didn't change any of their appraisal systems or anything like that. And what happened is people who are gone into the newer part of the organization, which was supposed to be innovative and digital and all of that, they were still being appraised using the bell curve of the old organization. And nobody was willing to take any risks because they were being evaluated by the old system. So building this whole culture of innovation, culture of change, culture which doesn't kind of knock you on your knuckles for failing, also requires a change in the way people are evaluated, right? So these are almost like startups that they need to kind of behave like startups where failure is par for the course. So that would be one big change in terms of culture. The other interesting things that we are finding, in both Shankar and I do research in this space as well, is that millennial leaders are actually better at bringing in change, because I guess your generation is a lot more, you are almost digital natives, right? So you are able to bring those culture into these companies, and people like Shankar and I are of a previous era, right? So even in that's the other interesting thing we're finding, that wherever millennial leaders are driving the companies, they see the culture seems to be a lot more innovative. And I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of these startups are able to scale so rapidly, because they're able to adopt, they're able to be nimble, they're able to be agile, which some of the traditional companies cannot. Now, the other element of culture is that it's not always that you're actually replacing the old with the new. In a lot of cases, you are running the old in parallel with the new, right? So how do you actually manage two cultures running at the same time is another big question that a lot of companies grapple with, right? I mean, just use a simple example, which those of you who attended my classes have certainly heard of, which is SBI, right? You have the old SBI, which is whatever 70 years old, which is branch based and has everything there, and it has a certain type of workforce and a certain type of customer. And then you have YONO, which is more target to millennials, right? So, and both need to exist, because end of the day, this is all customer driven, and you have two kinds of customers, and therefore you need to have two different kinds of business models. But this complicates culture quite a bit, because you're actually managing two different cultures within the same organization. And that's where it becomes even more complex on how do you actually manage these, right? And again, Professor Sunil Gupta, who will be addressing us soon, talks about this whole speedboat strategy versus landing dock strategy, where in the speedboat strategy, what it is that because you cannot do whatever you innovate digitally within the existing culture, you actually launch a speedboat which is completely away from the mothership, right? But in other scenarios, you're actually doing landing docks where you cannot really segregate the innovative organization from the traditional organization. So you build bridges and within to the organization, but you still kind of give them that little bit of independence to maintain their own culture. Shankar, you'd like to add?
No, I think you covered most of it. Just one, on the margin, one comment would be on, traditionally, if you look at a hierarchy of an organization, there is an implicit assumption in the way work happens that higher you go, the better you know, right? And hence you look for a top-down centralized view of organizing, making decisions. And this is true for almost 80% of enterprises even today, right? So that the reality of today is nobody knows, right? And nobody could ever know. So that the culture of co-creation, right? So just to complement this idea of risk taking, celebrating failures, and you should do it in systems where there are you have a company co-creates with the customer, right? Or a supplier co-creates an innovation with the original equipment manufacturer. So more and more, any traditional industry or organizational hierarchies do not have an arbitrage in terms of better understanding, right? So that is a new reality. So at some level, co-creation at a high level is one of the mechanisms for catalyzing, all that Professor Pingali was talking about, right? So with that, back to you, Radhika.
So Shankar, just to add to that, right? And I think you raise a very valid point here that, and again, it goes back to that landing docks and speedboat kind of a strategy that a lot of innovation can also happen outside your organization, right? A lot of companies have their own culture, and they have to keep that business running, but they can also partner with startups who are a lot more innovative, right? Now, in the past, from a culture perspective, companies are very inward thinking. They're saying, no, this is, we are in a top secret industry, whether it be pharma or whether it be any kind of any industry that involves intellectual property. There was this whole sense of boundaries of that company, and that we need to keep innovation within our boundaries, right? And that's a cultural thing. But now a lot of innovation is actually happening outside your company. And how do you actually assimilate that in those innovations? How do you build bridges to outside your company? I think these are some of the cultural changes that companies are grappling with, that you cannot have these while one is intra-departmental silos, there is also inter-company silos that need to get broken down, and you need to build channels with the ecosystem so that innovation flows in and out freely.
Thank you, Professor. It is interesting to know that how risk appetite may govern the culture of the culture itself, as to how a person can take a risk and define that failures are not a bad thing to have. Rather, as far as we are able to take some learnings from each failure and move on, that's a good thing to have. And I also noted a very interesting point that how legacy organizations are now in the process of acquiring any startups or merging with them, so as to have that innovation brought into the boundaries of the organization itself. So how the boundaries are blurring, and how these companies are adopting new ways of acquiring new companies instead of investing efforts to bring that change, which may take too long. So having a component itself which is rapidly adaptable, that makes more sense in this sense. So before I touch upon my next topic, there are a few questions which our audience has also asked, and I'll like to bring those up. So the first question is around artificial intelligence. So while it is a given that AI usage should be ethical and sustainable, but how do we ensure the accountability for it? Who takes the responsibility that AI is still working in an ethical manner, and who should be the go-to person in this case if things go wrong because of the usage of artificial intelligence? Because I think this is one of the crucial questions that needs to be answered before even the solutions related to AI are put into place.
No, great question, Shantanu. And the reason I'm smiling is Shankar and I debated this for 2 hours last night. So Shankar, over to you.
The first thing that we when we talk about ethics, and so we think of artificial intelligence as a superpower, right? And then these large companies are wielding this phenomenal superpower, and how can you govern them to use this power ethically, right? So because with AI, the longer you have been in, the more data you have, the more experience you have, the more powerful you are going to be. It's almost like, can you go and displace Google in search, right? It's very, very difficult to unseat somebody who has so much of leadership. Now, if he has this company has so much power, how do you make sure they don't abuse that power, right? So before I go and answer that question, there is one more inherent challenge in artificial intelligence. It's a much deeper problem, right? Let us, for the sake of argument or hypothesis, let's assume everybody does not have, no organization has any malicious intent in implementing artificial intelligence. So let's take that as a unreal assumption, right? Now, with this assumption itself, there are problems that we are going to face with, right? So with AI, we are trying to create a future, right? But artificial intelligence is going to rely on data that is already there, right? So I'm talking about every form of data, right? Let's say that everything that is written down in the form of text, everything that is spoken in the terms of audio, anything that is captured in terms of video, all the pictures, let's say everything gets codified. And now you say you're going to apply all this collective super intelligence, and super intelligence is a wrong word, the superpower of artificial intelligence to transform or automate or make our future better. But now, whatever is there in that data in terms of societal biases is going to go into the algorithm, right? So we have really funny situations where that we want to predict, whether this person is I'm giving you a hypothetical example, right? So let's say I've trained an algorithm based on all the data corpus, and it is going to predict, depending on something that is spoken or written down, whether this individual is a male or a female. Let's take is a prediction it's going to make, so that subsequent automations can happen, right? So Samuel was taking care of the child while he was preparing lunch, right? So if I feed in this sentence, typically algorithms which are trained on base data will assume that Samuel is, because the name, more than the name, the rest of the thing points to a gender bias to say that this is likely a homemaker who's a female, right? So whatever we put into these algorithmic future is going to carry the biases of existing societies, because our data reflects our societal realities, right? So this is a deeper problem than malicious application of data. Now, how are you going to correct racial biases, gender biases, biases that exist in our society? We wish it is not there, but it is going to be carried into the algorithmic future, right? So this is a fundamental, problem, right? So there are efforts to make sure that the biases which are inherent in the ways of the world today doesn't get carried into automation. So that is a well-meaning effort that's going on. The second part, right now, let us say that, this is not an easy solution, right? So the problem exists. It's a very, very difficult problem to solve, right? And Radhika, to your question, we cannot wait until all of these problems are solved to apply, right? So people will keep applying artificial intelligence into changing work, right? So we be aware that such biases are going to be carried. The second part is malicious use of data or information. Here, traditionally, malpractices, anti-competitive practices have all been driven by governmental setups, right? Regulators, regulation. And if you guys can go back and check, so for example, digital lending in India, right? So the kind of predatory practices of digital platforms, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 loaning apps, right? Trap poor people and then go after them, and then eventually some of them leads into people ending their lives, right? So if this is a let's say a malicious application of these, can a centralized government-based regulator govern this, right? Two problems, right? One is these disruptions are bona fide, right? It is going to create financial inclusion. There are positives of this. On the other side, there is a malified problem where this could be used or abused. So one realization which is increasingly coming, I won't make it as an assertion or a truth, but a directional thing, is that these cannot be government or central regulated, because there are two issues, right? So you will over regulate and stifle innovation, and the second is you will not be able to regulate because you have to keep pace with the changes. It requires a lot of agility. So one way to solve this is self-regulation, right? So where you have certified operators, meaning these are genuine companies who are coming in, and then they have certain ways of, say, only certified algorithms will be used, right? So the certified algorithms will be tested for biases, etc., right? So self-regulation becomes, and if they innovate, the regulation also follows that innovation curve, right? So that they are also agile in regulating. I won't go too much into this, but there is a report on digital lending recommendation from a panel which has come out of RBI on November 18th, like 2-3 days ago, right? If you read that, it's in Money Control on all the public press, right? So read that. The recommendation for governing digital lending, which is a lot driven by artificial intelligence, is directionally going to be self-regulated, right? What the government or the central government can do is that make sure the operators are not random, they are certified. You can have thousands of companies, and then this consortium manages itself, right? So that's one direction people are taking. But Shantanu, the two dimensions of challenge I'm calling out is not solved, right? But I'm just giving you where our heart is in terms of where the industry is headed towards. And this doesn't yet solve the immediate superpowers that we have in our economies, right? So we will have to figure out a way, but self-governance and proactive debiasing of the world in terms of data are two directions that are taking us. Radhika, you want to?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure, sir. So yeah, I actually recalled the point around self-governance. It was taught to us in one of the lectures in multi-sided platforms as to how now whenever any startup is coming up with a platform like this, be it into hospitality or into travel or anything like that, how self-governance is one of the important things that has to be paid attention right from the beginning, because once the malicious actors are already onto the platform, it becomes very difficult to then control their behavior. So right from the onboarding, it has to be given importance. So moving on to our next topic, which I think is also very relevant to when we talk about digital transformation, is the talent. So given how the whole industry is shifting and how rapidly these transformations are happening, there is an acute shortage of talent, of the people who can actually manage these transformations, who can first of all understand what a transformation encompasses and then lead it to the way it solves the problem. So how are the organizations managing this situation of talent shortage? Any views on that?
Shankar, all yours. This is your PhD thesis, so go ahead.
Right. See, the talent as see, one thing is, this is a paradox, right? On the one hand, we say artificial intelligence is taking over work, right? People are going to be unemployed, right? So on one hand, we are thinking about such possibilities, fearing AI will kill, human endeavor, right? In terms of work. On the other hand, the reality is that we don't have people to do whatever we need get done in the industry. So there are at least two ways of looking at this, right? One is, how do you transform the incumbent talent? People, I mean, just imagine, are people even trained to learn themselves, train themselves or upgrade themselves after maybe they reach 30, right? In a traditional world, we don't have people upgrading constantly. There was never a need, And once you are set, you can almost guarantee that the trajectory will take you to retirement, and you're going to find a fulfilling post-retirement life, right? But the incumbent organization, incumbent talent, which is not, so I'm not even talking about digital generation which is born after 1980, right? I'm talking about people who are like born after 2000, right, have already been exposed to the idea of continuous upgrading, continuous learning, right? They are not uncomfortable with, and I learned a particular framework of that's obsolete, I'm moving on to another thing, becomes their second nature. So the first thing is, as we talked about the culture, there's a culture of continuous learning and upgrading incumbent, because that incumbent 80-90% of workforce has very low half-life, very high half-life period, right? They are going to retire in next 30-40 years, and the future would be already created. So continuous upgrading and reskilling, upskilling of existing resources, and making it them understand that it is not unusual. So when we did the management development program for RBI, they were trying to learn and understand, these are deputy general managers, senior managers who are with 15-20 years of experience, trying to understand the coding related to algorithms, related to deep learning, right? So completely unheard of in this industry, right? So even large organizations which are more classical are already opening up to the idea of that continuous learning is a necessity. The second part of the problem is that the newer people who are coming in, they are fewer in number, and that type of work, the new work is exploding, right? So here we again deal with talent in two dimensions. One is capacity, which means you have to work the supply chain, have interventions with the universities, curriculum change, even in engineering, right? So today it is very tactical in terms of how engineering students get exposed to industry before they come into the industry. We still need 3-4 months of proper training, maybe sometimes 1 year of training to make them productive. So one is working the supply itself of the new talent is an endeavor which, today it is all company specific. I'm hoping that in the future we will have consortiums working with consortium of universities. The other part is, the other way you deal with talent shortage is improve productivity, right? So how do you make these highly rarefied skills more productive, right? So which we have the technologies for it, we have the means for it, but we cannot celebrate superstars for too long, right? So this is a guy who can do, he's a wizard of artificial intelligence. This kid knows blockchain inside out, right? That's not the type of celebration we have to have. How much they can codify their expertise into assets and tools so that can be transferred to others, right? So you can probably, if a person, so it's happened in radiology and medical, right? For example, the radiologists are always short in number, right? So now what they have done, they've augmented artificial intelligence, made them more productive, right? So each radiologist can do more throughput. That's also coming to knowledge work, right? So can we make these high demand skills more productive? Because today we are not, right? So I dealt with the three part, the legacy upskilling and the modern talent. Can you increase or improve the supply and also make them more productive, right? These are the three levers that we have to deal with the talent supply, and the talent supply is not going to go away, at least in our anticipation, anywhere in the next 3 to 5 years easily. And we are going to live with this constraint.
I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we keep hearing, and obviously it's good for business schools and and engineering colleges in India. But as Shankar said, that as institutions, we also need to make the necessary changes in our curriculum to cater to this, right? I mean, we can't stick to our traditional curriculum and then expect these companies to train people after they join. They don't have the time. Their customers are demanding change right now, or their internal organizations are demanding change now. So these companies are looking for digital ready employees, and I think it also, the onus is on educational institutions like us to make sure that we provide them what we need. Adding to another point that Shankar mentioned is this whole thing of gig workers, right? And at least I believe there's going to be more and more of that, because in these very specialized kind of skills, I think it works both ways. From an employee perspective, why should they tie themselves up with one company, right? And from a company perspective, these skills that are required for a short period of time to do a transformation. So why can't they look at gig workers coming and helping them with that? And this actually goes back to an earlier question that you mentioned, Radhika. You asked about culture, right? I mean, Again, even organizations still have these silos. HR still have these silos that unless somebody is a full-time employee, they cannot do some of these activities. So that's a cultural shift that organizations also need to bring in themselves, that gig workers is something that's going to be a new normal or a normal going into the future.
Thank you so much, professors. And it brings us to the top of the hour. But if I were to sum up what is the fundamental thing that makes any digital transformation successful, it is all about embracing the change, because there are so many moving parts of it. And unless those parts are changed in a way with a vision of, or with the goal of, transforming the way the business itself operates, then it would be really difficult. So that change is important, embracing change is important, and understanding how to change and what to change and what amount is also important. So that would be my takeaway from this interaction with you both. And I would also like to thank the audience for being part of this session. I would now hand over to Megha for any closing remark that she might have.
Yeah.
Thank you, Radhika. Thank you.
Thank you, Ravi.
So I'm sure that our audience has a lot to take away from this rich discussion, and we got a lot of insights on what goes behind the digital transformation and how to prepare ourselves well in a better manner. So yeah, I would like to thank our professors, Professor Srinivas, Professor Shankar, and Radhika for their precious time and sharing their views and ideas with us. And I would like to thank the audience for joining in the session. So thank you all, everyone.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Have a lovely Sunday, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you all.